Chapter 3 The Madness of Odysseus. The father of Helen had been a far-sighted man. When he saw that his daughter was wooed by every prince in Greece, he determined to make her chosen husband the greatest of them all. He therefore made every suitor take an oath to count Helen's husband as his overlord for the future. It so happened that Menelaus, on whom the king's choice finally fell, was not enterprising and had hitherto made no demand on the services of the kings of Greece. When, however, envoys were sent to fetch back Helen, the Trojans, commercial rivals of Greece, supported Paris. They refused to give up Helen or even to pay a fine. Thereupon Menelaus, goaded on by his more ambitious brother, Agamemnon, sent all the kings a message to meet with him at Aulis, where a fleet was being fitted out to punish Troy. Great dismay fell on the kings of Greece when this news was brought to them. It was years since the wooing of Helen. Those who did not win her had put her out of their minds and married others. Now they were husbands and fathers, busy with cares of their kingdoms. Though they were jealous of the power of Troy, they felt that this quarrel was not theirs, and that the town was very far away. Kingdoms would have to be left to the management of a struggling wife, of an aged father, or a half-grown son. The seas were wide and dangerous. Success was uncertain. Although the kings of Greece would not publicly break their oaths, yet it was clear that they did not want to come. The more the kings wavered, the more determinedly Agamemnon pushed them on. This was his chance to launch the greatest of fleets that the world had seen, and to sack the greatest of cities. His messengers were persuasive men, carefully chosen, and Palamedes, the cleverest of them all, was sent to Ithaca, where King Odysseus dwelt. Odysseus was the wisest man in Greece, and the most winning talker. He was broad and burly in appearance, at first sight less impressive than taller men. Words came to him as easily as the snowflakes came in winter, and the notes of his great deep voice held men spellbound while he played upon their hearts. No man who had heard Odysseus speak could fail to respect him, wherefore Agamemnon had hoped to use him to persuade the other kings. Unfortunately, of all the kings in Greece, Odysseus was the most unwilling to come. His land was farthest from Troy, since Ithaca was a little island off the western coast, while Troy was across the eastern sea. He loved the rocky country and the simple farmers and fishermen of his home. He longed to stay with his dear wife Penelope, who had just borne him a son. In the face of these things, his oath seemed quite unreasonable, yet the wise king lacked a good excuse to break it. Therefore, about 2 days before the arrival of Palamedes, Odysseus suddenly went mad. It was very convincingly done. In spite of their natural suspicions, even the elders were taken in. Early one morning, Odysseus was found on the shore, driving 2 oxen harnessed to a plow and turning the dry sand over in furrows. Round his neck was a great bag of salt that he was sowing as he went, muttering wildly to himself. "Must get on with the plowing," he was saying. "Must be done by dark." People tried to reason with him, but it was no use. His wild eyes looked right through them, and he gave no sign of having heard. A man tried to stop the oxen, but Odysseus drove right on and would have plowed him under if he had not jumped aside. Penelope came down to plead with him, her young son in her arms, but though she implored him to listen, and the baby cooed to him, he took no notice. Penelope walked up and down beside him, talking and trying to make him listen all day long. When night came, attendants led her home, but Odysseus merely loosed the oxen and lay down on the furrows. At dawn he was up again, hair and beard matted with sand, plowing along the seashore as before. This was how Palamedes found him. Distracted men lined the beach, and his wife walked beside him carrying the child. The man himself, wild-eyed and dirty, was goading the oxen on and muttering constantly, "Must be done by dark." Palamedes did not believe in Odysseus's madness. "This is too well timed," he declared with scorn, hoping to arouse the king into betraying anger. Odysseus's face was burned bright red by the sun, so that there was no chance of his changing color, and Palamedes soon found himself as helpless as Penelope had been. He ran up and down by the plowshare in the hot sun, breathlessly repeating the message of Agamemnon. He tried to stop the oxen, but it was knocked down and nearly trampled. He appealed to the watching elders, and they simply wrung their hands. He was hot and dirty and bruised where he had fallen beneath the oxen. He was making himself ridiculous, and he knew it. The group of spectators, concerned as they were, began to find him so. Presently, some of them laughed. Palamedes lost his temper. With a bound, he jumped on Penelope, snatched her child, and flung it down in the sand straight under the oxen's feet. The crafty king, who had noticed nothing for 2 days, suddenly and completely gave himself away. He wrenched the plow around with all his strength and then sprang to the heads of the plunging oxen. He snatched his child away from the trampling feet. Then he turned on Palamedes and knocked him down. It was no use pretending to be mad any more. Odysseus had come to his senses and listened to the messenger with as much dignity as he could assume. It was he that was ridiculous now. I would not be Palamedes, he whispered one old man to another as he saw the king's gray eyes rest on Agamemnon's messenger. No wise man cares to be made to look like a fool, and though Odysseus is a good friend, he is a fearful enemy. In later years, news came to Ithaca that Palamedes had been put to death by the Greeks for having dealings with the Trojans. The old men put their heads together and their beards wagged busily. Did we not say our king is a fearful enemy? They whispered. A rumor then went round that a plot of Odysseus had destroyed an innocent man. Be that as it may, Odysseus kept his oath to Menelaus and manned his ships. He kissed Penelope goodbye and saw her holding the little boy as she waved to him from the shore. It was 20 years before he had sight of his wife or child again. Chapter 4. The Discovery of Achilles. When Agamemnon had won over Odysseus, his task with the other kings was far easier. With Odysseus's example and persuasion, they gradually assembled until every king had arrived but one, the greatest hero of all. This was Achilles, only son of Peleus and Thetis, by this time grown to manhood, and now famous for his strength, his speed of foot, and his beauty. Peleus was too old to lead the powerful array of the Myrmidons, but in Achilles could be found a successor. All had heard of Achilles' feats, for he had been brought up by the centaur Chiron, half horse, half man, who had been tutor to many heroes. Achilles, it was said, could outrace the deer and catch the flying dart that his own hand had flung. He could check a maddened team of horses in full flight and face a lion or a mad she-bear alone. All knew of his goddess mother and of the tale that her son would be more famous far than his father, the mighty Peleus. Unfortunately, there was another prophecy about Achilles, which silver-footed Thetis had learned from her father, an old wise sea god. Though her son was to be very famous, his life was to be short. He would die in the height of his glory before the gates of Troy. Thetis was desperately anxious to cheat the fates. When her son was a baby, she had taken him down to the gray mud banks of the Styx, which flowed around the land of the dead. She had plunged him into the seething waters that even the ghosts dared not enter, and thereby she had made his flesh immune from death. No weapon could kill him. One heel only was unprotected, where the goddess had gripped her baby as she dipped him in. Not content with this, Thetis had gone further and tried to make her son immortal. Here she was prevented by Peleus, who did not understand what she was doing and feared for the baby's life. Thetis left her husband in anger at this and went back to the dim depths of the sea. Yet she still watched over Achilles, and to protect him from war, she sent him at last to the court of the kings of Scyros to be brought up among his daughters. Here Achilles lived in seclusion, and because of his youth and beauty passed for a girl when he was dressed like one. In private he might ride and run or throw the javelin, but when he came forward among the princesses and the king said, "These are my daughters," no one could distinguish Achilles, though all knew that one was he. The messenger of Agamemnon had been sent to summon Achilles, but the king said, "I have only daughters." And closely as the messenger looked, he could not tell to which one he should appeal. They all blushed and looked astonished. Achilles, who was secretly wedded to one of the princesses, Didamia, had given his word to his wife and mother not to reveal himself. He was therefore silent, although he himself wished to go. Finally, Agamemnon appealed to Odysseus, who thought of a trick to discover the truth. He came as a traveling merchant, not a messenger, asking to display his wares in the palace of the king. At first, he showed valuable ornaments, pins, combs, bracelets, women's wear only, and too precious for ordinary girls. Presently, therefore, a servant came to the great hall from the princesses, asking the merchant to bring his goods to the mistress's room. Attendants picked up the bales and boxes, some of them not yet unpacked, and escorted the merchant across the courtyard to where the princesses sat. Odysseus watched the girls carefully as they exclaimed over his wares. Each picked up pins and jewels, tried them, paraded with them in gown or hair. Yet it seemed to the crafty watcher that one showed less eagerness. Casually he undid another bundle for them. In it lay more trinkets, even rarer than before, but in the midst of them lay a marvelous sword, such as a man might dream of all his life and never own. The third princess could not take her eyes off that sword. She picked up her other things and played with them, but she always made an excuse to put them back. Her fingers went stealthily to the blade, to the hilt, when she thought the merchant was not looking. The piles by the sides of the other two grew bigger, but the third princess had chosen nothing yet. At last the merchant feigned departure and began to close his bundles. "I must go now," he said, "but next year I may come again and have more treasures for you. The third princess does not like my wares, however. Is there not anything she would buy?" The third princess hesitated, then decided to risk it. "Yes," she said clearly, "I will buy the sword." "You shall have it as a gift," said the merchant, "to a king's son from a king. For you must be Achilles, and I am Odysseus, come here with a message for you." Thus Odysseus delivered his message, and Achilles was glad to be discovered, because he longed for the great adventure. He collected his men and set forth for Aulis, but his goddess mother wept to see him go. Chapter 5. Iphigenia. Agamemnon lay encamped at Aulis. Black ships were drawn up too deep above the tide marks of seaweed circling the bay. Offshore the boats of latecomers swung at anchor, their oars under the benches, and their square sails carefully stowed. By countless smoky campfires men were boiling pitch, heating metal, cooking whole oxen, or burning sacrifices to the immortal gods. The wind blew steadily in from the sea, carrying the noise of the encampment far over the uplands, whence shepherds could hear the crash of the axes, the clinking of armorers' hammers, the lowing of cattle, and the confused shouts of men. Each day brought fresh arrivals, until there seemed no end to the massed forces of Greece. Chief among the heroes were Achilles and Odysseus, yet there were many others present of almost equal fame. From the horse-breeding plain of Argos came Diomede, the charioteer. Gigantic Ajax, the prince of Salamis, bore a shield of 7 layers of horsehide studded with bronze. It covered its mighty owner from head to foot, and he swung it with ease, though no other man could wield it. With him was his half-brother, Teucer, the archer, who was the son of a Trojan princess carried away by their father long years before. A second Ajax, son of Aulis, was a famous spearman, and after Achilles, the swiftest runner in the host. The most respected was white-bearded Nestor of Pylos. He still led his forces in person, although he had warlike sons. These were the greatest of the chieftains, yet besides them came hundreds more. The mightiest expedition that the world had known lay ready at last, waiting only the changing of the wind. A favorable wind was long in coming. Day after day it blew steadily in from the east. Food was unpacked and eaten. Men huddled uncomfortably in rude shelters of turf began to murmur. Some of the kings talked openly of going home. Such a storm, they said, was a sign of the gods' ill favor. The truth was they were discontented, for they found Agamemnon high-handed and haughty. "Overlords are better at a distance, whence they can make no claims on us," said they. Agamemnon, who heard the grumbling, realized that his host was likely to melt away. If his army went home without starting, his authority would be over. He would become the laughing-stock of all Greece. While the men still held together, it was essential that the wind should change. The king sought out Calchas, the prophet, who knew the mind of the gods and could foretell the future. "You must tell me how to win a fair breeze," he said. Calchas promised to find an answer, but he spent long at the altars, praying and burning offerings before he came gravely back to the king. "We are indeed in the gods' ill favor. It is better that we go home," he declared. Agamemnon leaped in indignation. "That is impossible," he said, as his staff rang sharply on the ground. "If none of us is ever to return, we still must sail. Give me a fair wind and a hope of glory if it costs my kingdom and my life." The old man put his hand to his beard in a slow, thoughtful gesture. "It will indeed cost life," he answered. "The price is too high, O king. For the last time, disband us and go home." "Never!" cried Agamemnon hotly. "Never! Do you think this is a game that I can interrupt as I please? I have staked everything on this quarrel, and if I fail now, I lose all. What treasure is too great for the gods to demand of me?" "Your daughter, Iphigenia," answered the prophet, with his eyes on the ground. The king laughed with relief and scorn. "I will offer her gladly," he declared. "I had thought to marry her nobly, but the gods may make her a priestess if they will." "She must be slain on the altar of Artemis," said Calchas distinctly, "as the price of a fair wind." Agamemnon stared in horror. His gay young daughter a human sacrifice? Her father brought to consent to such a deed. No glory the world could offer could wipe away such sin. "It is impossible," he said shortly. "We shall wait here. Sooner or later the wind will change." The wind did not change, and presently the other chiefs learned the dreadful news from Calchas. Plenty of them were quick to say that they had all offered their lives for a king who would not sacrifice a single one for them. Although they did not wish the maiden's death, they were glad to put the blame on Agamemnon for breaking up the host. At last the king saw that he must take on himself either failure or the greatest of crimes. He was genuinely fond of his daughter, but she was less to him than his pride. He sent a messenger to bring Iphigenia to the camp. The poor girl came full of eagerness and decked out in her best clothes, for Agamemnon had given as an excuse that he had arranged a match for her with Achilles. In this, however, the king overreached himself somewhat, since his wife, Clytemnestra, insisted on attending the wedding of her child. Clytemnestra was the sister of Helen, and far prouder, though less fair. She now felt just as much rage against Agamemnon as agony at losing her child. The girl herself, stunned at first by the tidings, was at the last pitifully brave. It was the furious mother who hurled at Agamemnon all the reproaches the victim left unsaid. "I will repay you for this hour if it takes me 10 years of waiting," she cried. Agamemnon turned away from her without answering. His mind was made up, and his pride thought little of a woman's threats, though he knew the fierce nature of his queen. He was perhaps more moved by the pleas of Achilles, who was touched by the young girl's courage and put aside his own hopes of glory to intercede for her. Nevertheless, the king's nature could not bear the reproach of failure, and he hardened his heart. Iphigenia was led out to the sacrifice. The knife of the slayer rose and fell. Only the gods knew that what seemed her lifeless body was really that of a fawn, since Artemis might demand but would not actually accept such an offering. The goddess snatched up Iphigenia in her arms and carried her off to the far distant land of Taurus to serve as a priestess there. The corpse lay on the altar. Men looked up from the sacrifice to see the changing of the wind. Instantly all was confusion, as each hurried down to his ship, drowning the memory of the deed they had allowed in the thoughts of glory to come. The fleet put out from Aulis, but by their crime the heroes had entered on a war that, though glorious, was to be grim. A little urn full of ashes was all that came back to many, and many a home. Numbers fell fighting in battle, and the seas drowned countless more. 10 years passed slowly. In Ithaca, Queen Penelope wept nightly for Odysseus, her lord. In the restless kingdom of Myrmidons, the failing Peleus struggled vainly for order. Longing for the help of his son, in Mycenae, grim Clytemnestra kept her husband's axe sharp and bright. Agamemnon's people looked eagerly for their king's return, and Clytemnestra waited too, that in the moment of her husband's triumph, she might murder him. Dun dun dun!